Boys Don't Cry, written by YouBlitheringIdiot, read to you by So Breezy. Chapter 2, To Get You Back to My Side. Now I would do most anything to get you back to my side, but I just keep on laughing, hiding the tears in my eyes. Boys Don't Cry, The Cure. He had to find his brother and talk to him. Exams were starting in 2 days, and then the Easter holidays, and then more exams afterwards. He was an expert at this now. An intricate game, predicting what grades Regulus would get, and modifying his results accordingly. Only this year, he was sitting his owls. Merlin knew what his parents would decide this time around. Did they want him to get the best in his class? To prove pure-blood supremacist beliefs? He had no idea. That alone put him off studying. Not that he needed an excuse. He was too exhausted to think in sentences, let alone study. He still remembered that summer at the end of first year, standing at the far end of the platform, heavy dread squeezing his chest. He had successfully avoided seeing his parents all year, developing mysterious illnesses at Christmas and Easter. He had felt bad for abandoning Reg, but not bad enough to make himself go home. "I can't face them," he had said, his cool indifference cracking. "I can't face spending a whole summer with them." He hadn't told any of his friends what his parents were really like, not even James. "You can, and you will," James had answered, his hand on Sirius's right shoulder, steadying him. "Shakespeare, Henry V, Battle Speech of Harfleur," Remus had begun, in his beautiful hoarse voice. "One more into the breach, dear friends. One more." Remus was right. It felt like going into battle. "Come on, Pads. You got first place in class, same as me. They're going to be bloody proud. They have to be, right?" James had reasoned, waving his end-of-term report in Sirius's face with a grin. "I'll come with you," Sirius swallowed. "I'll come too," Remus had offered. "No way. Under no," Sirius had replied, looking at Remus in alarm. "All right." Remus had looked a bit offended. Peter had looked relieved. How could he explain to them? He followed James, reluctantly, clutching his report, the feeling of impending doom worsening as he approached his parents. "How do you do, Mr. and Mrs. Black?" James said, putting out his scrawny arm confidently. "I'm James, Sirius's best friend." While Berga Black's lips curled as she looked him up and down, taking in his lopsided tie, his bushy hair, and the school shirt half sticking out of his trousers. "James Potter," he had said sullenly, looking at his father. A pureblood, but not one of the sacred 28. Still, it could have been worse. His father's face relaxed marginally, and his thin lips twitched, an attempted smile. There was an awkward moment as neither parent bothered to address James. James didn't seem to notice or care either way. "Sirius came first in his class," James told them, beaming at his friend proudly. "So did you—" James's elbow hit his side and he yelped. Wordlessly, Orion Black took the report from Sirius's hand without asking. His cold face scanned the results. "First in the year for data," he said in a low voice. Shit, he hadn't thought about that. Merlin fuck. "Yes," he said, refusing to look scared. "Sirius is brilliant at data. He's incredible," James said, smiling widely but sounding a bit unsure for once in his life. "Everyone thinks so, even the slith—" Sirius stood on James's foot to shut him up. "Sirius," Orion Black said, ignoring his friend and grabbing him by the collar. "A word." Without warning, Sirius felt everything go black, head spinning, and landed just outside the front door of 12 Grimald Place. The Black family, famous for its knowledge of the dark arts, practically unsurpassed in all of England? And yet you, the heir, thought it sensible to get first in defense? He spat out the last word. Orion's voice was practically a whisper, an iron grip around his neck. He knew what that tone of voice meant, but surely defending yourself against attack was a good thing? Fuck. Merlin, fuck. Next year, he hadn't bothered showing them his report, and they hadn't asked. When Regulus started in first year, it had never once crossed his mind that this issue would resurface. Fast forward to the end of the year, he and Regulus walking towards their parents, reluctantly, slowly. The marauders shouting muted encouragement, Peter waving an invisible sword at him. Where dwell the brave at heart? He had smiled at Peter, then turned to his little brother, whom he had hardly seen all year. He was sure his parents had warned Regulus to stay away from him, and he hadn't tried hard enough to reach Reggie, too ready to block out anything, anyone that reminded him of home. Such a coward. Ready to face them? He said in a forced, cheerful tone. Regulus didn't reply. He looked a little paler than usual, his hair immaculate, his uniform tight-fitting and uncomfortable. He knew Regulus hated the scratchy material, the high collars, the tags against his skin. Perhaps Reg knew something he didn't know. Which turned out to be the case, for as soon as they arrived home, hardly setting foot in the door, his father held out his hands. "Reports, both of you, now," he said, looking at Regulus sternly. "What are you?" Sirius began, opening his leather satchel and removing the crumpled parchment. The report flew out of his hands. Wordlessly, he watched as his father's eyes scanned the two lists, comparing them. When his father looked up, Sirius reflexively stepped in front of Regulus, seeing the rage in Orion's face. "Despite everything we told you, Regulus, despite our conversations, you failed to beat your brother in anything but potions and arithmancy?" "What?" said Sirius, looking at his brother in shock. Merlin, fuck. Why hadn't Regulus told him? He would have... "Regulus, my office, now," Orion said. "No," said Sirius, trying to think of something, anything, to stop his brother having to follow Orion. "Reports mean nothing. We all know Reg is way more intelligent." "Maybe next time he can prove it," Walburga said, looking at Regulus and holding a handkerchief in her hand, sniffing. "You've upset me terribly, Regulus. And you know how dreadful I feel when you don't meet our expectations. When you let us down." "I'm sorry, Mama," Regulus said stiffly. Sirius, who knew him so well, could tell how upset his poor brother was, despite no change in facial expression. "Leave him alone, you manipulative hag," he snapped, pushing Regulus behind him and turning towards his father. "It's my fault. This is all my fault," he said defiantly, desperately. "I'm afraid for once that it isn't," Orion said, smiling thinly, "although I will not allow you to disrespect your parents in this house." He must have used wandless magic, because Sirius felt a burning sensation under his ribs, before doubling over in pain, unable to stand. "Regulus will be punished, as he knows he deserves," his father said, in a cold, calm voice. "Yes, Papa," said Regulus. His father walked away, Regulus walking slowly after him, his hands balled up into tight fists, while Walburga ignored him, sitting down at the drawing room table with a contented sigh, while Sirius lay hunched over on the floor in the corner, dry retching. "Creature, some more of the Vila wine! Spitpot, I am expecting a flu call from my favorite niece, Bellatrix," Walburga said, glancing at Sirius with disinterest. He was not going to let his ghastly cousin see him like this. He crawled into the hall, wiping a hand over his mouth, and leaning against the wall. He no longer had his wand. The Black family portraits glared down at him. He was not going to cry. But being home was so much worse than he had imagined, when he was surrounded by his mates in Hogwarts. Telling himself he was exaggerating and just being a dramatic, cowardly little shit in a voice sounding suspiciously like his mother's. Poor Reg. He ought to have known. Should have guessed this might happen. Why did he always have to fuck everything up? When he thought he could stand, he walked up the stairs, holding onto the banisters, doubled over, hoping he didn't vomit. As silently as he could, he peered inside his little brother's room. Regulus was sitting at his desk,
looking white as a sheet, back not touching the chair, in front of his charms book. "Hey, Reggie," he whispered, leaning for support against the doorframe and trying to look casual, as black spots danced in front of his eyes. "You okay?" Regulus didn't answer him for a beat. "Reg?" Sirius asked, biting his lip. "I will be," Regulus stated in a low voice, staring at his schoolbook. Regulus never lied. Fuck. Good, Sirius said, shuffling against the wall to get a closer look at his little brother. "You smell," Regulus said. Sirius winced. His brother was always sensitive to smells. "Yeah," he muttered, cleaning his face again with his shirt sleeve. "No wand." Regulus looked up briefly and cast a cleaning spell his way. His eyes were red and his skin blotchy. He knew Reg hated anyone seeing him cry. He hardly ever cried. "Reg," he said, "it's fine. My results were subpar. Papa was correct. I disappointed them. I disappointed myself." "That's bollocks," said Sirius, feeling a rush of anger as he looked at his crestfallen baby brother. "Your results were perfectly great, and you came first in your year in potions and arithmancy." "Not as good as you," Regulus said, his tone matter of fact. "Everyone knows you're way cleverer than me," Sirius said, a twist of guilt in his stomach. He felt lightheaded. "Probably, but when it comes to exams?" "I know it, but," Regulus said, with a wary sigh, "you know too much, and you can't decide what's relevant to the question, and you end up trying to fit in all the facts you know, and then you run out of time, and you don't actually get to answer half the questions," Sirius said. "How do you know?" Regulus said, dropping his quill. Sirius shrugged. "I know you," he said. "I don't understand so many things you seem to know," Regulus said. "People, mostly." His voice sounded low and dejected. "I don't understand so many things you think are obvious," Sirius said. "It won't happen again, Reg, I promise you." "That is illogical, Sirius. Of course it could happen again." "Not if I have anything to do with it," Sirius muttered to himself. "Sirius, don't lie or do badly on purpose," Regulus said, looking at his brother with a distressed expression. "That's cheating. I want to do better than you on my own merit." Sirius rolled his eyes. "Why would you care which of us does better?" "Because Papa. Because they care. And I can't let them down." Sirius looked at Regulus's white face and the way he held back stiffly, and silently vowed that Regulus would never again have to suffer like that because of him. "Don't start studying straight away, though, Reggie. You need rest. Your brain needs a break. Why don't we what?" said Regulus, closing his eyes and leaning against the back of the chair before jerking away immediately. But Sirius was walking towards the far end of Regulus's room. "What the ever-living fuck is this, Reg?" he said coldly, pointing to an entire wall filled with parchments and interconnecting arrows and notes charmed onto it. "A fucking shrine to Voldy?" Regulus pursed his lips shut. "Well, what the hell is this, you tosser?" Sirius's voice rose, sharp and livid, furious, scared and horrified and shocked. I've been researching Lord Voldemort. He's a very interesting figure, Sirius. And don't address him as Voldy. I'm sure that could get you in terrible trouble with— Fuck Voldy! You hear me? Fuck that absolute vile bastard! Don't you dare develop an interest in him and his Death Eaters, or I swear to fucking Merlin, I will— Sirius's breathing had become ragged. "You will what?" said Regulus, his face unreadable as always. What could he do? This was what happened when your stupid, trusting, clueless little brother was dumped in a Slytherin house, sought out by the mini Death Eater wannabes, and encouraged by his disgusting parents. He could not, would not, simply stand idly by and let it happen. I swear to you, if you go anywhere near Voldy's supporters, I will personally beat you to a pulp and report you to the Aurors. I am not joking, Reg." Sirius was now standing over Regulus and shouting at him. He watched his brother flinch and his hands shoot up in agitation before he pretended to smooth his robes. For someone who hates how her parents behave, you sound remarkably similar, as a matter of fact, Regulus said quietly. I don't mean... That's just a way of... Sirius said, his feeling of nausea resurfacing. I have no idea what you mean, Sirius. You speak in riddles, and quite frankly, actually, you are not my parent. You cannot make me do anything. I'm so tired of everybody telling me what to do and how to behave. Fuck! Said Sirius. He wanted to shake some sense into his brother. How could he be so... You're so fucking stupid, Reg! They're murderers! Torturers! He said. I have already been told I'm stupid. There is no need to reiterate it again. It is unhelpful. Regulus's voice trembled as he looked down at his book. Reg, I didn't mean that. Merlin, shit, you know I don't think you're... Sirius's tone had changed. Regret the only emotion. I have no idea what you mean. You keep contradicting yourself. It's exhausting, Regulus said, sitting up straighter and picking up his quill again. Mama and Cousin Bellatrix said that muggles are killing wizards and witches every day, that Lord Voldemort is simply trying his best to protect us all. We are so outnumbered. It's self-defense. Lord Voldemort is a very intelligent man. Did you know that in 1955 he... And you believed them? Morgana's hell, you actually fucking believed those lies? A hollow, bitter laugh escaped Sirius. He wanted to pull his hair out, or take Reg and disappear into the middle of nowhere, keep him safe from this toxic bullshit, stop his parents from... As though on cue, the door to Regulus's bedroom was flung open. While Berga stood in the doorway, an unfinished glass of red wine in one hand, her wand pointing towards her sons in the other. Sirius Orion Black, did you threaten to beat up your brother? That's what you took from this entire conversation? Sirius stared at her, dumbfounded. Regulus, darling, answer the question and don't lie, she ordered. Look at me. How can you encourage him, Mother? He's going to end up dead if you're not careful, or worse, Sirius yelled. Do not call me Mother, Walburga said, flicking her eyes at him with a look of disgust. Mama and Papa is how you address your parents. One is not a commoner. Regulus? Regulus looked conflicted, squirming under his mother's gaze. He doesn't like being forced to look people in the... Sirius said, clenching his fists. Regulus? She said. Yes, Mama, but he also said he didn't mean it, Regulus whispered. Thank you, Regulus. That will be all. Walburga smiled at her younger son. Fuck. The smile was completely gone now, replaced by cold disdain as she pointed her wand at Sirius. Your father's study. Now, she said. You say you love Reggie, but your version of love is clearly... Sirius hissed angrily, as the wand poked his back and he stumbled forwards reluctantly. Quiet! Welcome home, Sirius, he muttered under his breath. We missed you, Sirius. Hope you enjoy your interminable summer holidays. Another poke, and his hands hit the heavy door of Orion's study, and the door creaked open slowly. He swallowed. He woke with a muffled scream. He was leaning against the alcove near Dumbledore's office, dribbling against the stone wall. Had he really fallen asleep standing up? What the fuck was wrong with him? Nice one, James. Why, thank you, Sirius. My pleasure. James's cauldron was starting to bubble a bit too energetically, but he hadn't noticed. This draught of peace is a piece of piss, he said with a cocky grin. It's supposed to take an hour to make it, and we'll have it finished in 20 minutes. Potions is a stupid subject. You just stick a load of ingredients in a pot and mix it around occasionally. I mean, it's essentially like making stew, Sirius said, leaning his elbow on the desk and holding up his head. James couldn't help noticing the black rings around his eyes and the unusual pallor of his friend's cheeks. He looked like death warmed up. And when, my dear Padfoot, have you ever successfully made stew? A snort behind him made him turn around. Lily Evans grinned back. Made you laugh, did we? he said, feeling inordinately pleased with himself. Lily's eyes twinkled mischievously. "Idiots make me laugh," she agreed. "Ugh," Severus Snape, who was partnered with Lily, made a scoffing sound beside her. He was scowling at James as though he had just ruined his day. James beamed. He was damn well livid with Snape. Mad as hell for what he had done to Sirius, and it had taken every ounce of self-control to stop himself dueling the bastard to date. He really didn't know how much longer he could last. If he could annoy Snape and make Lily laugh, this was his day. "Well, we know she likes Idiots. She hangs around with the biggest one in class," James said, winking at Lily. "Idiot," Lily said, rolling her eyes at him. "Idiots," he said. He was sure his dimple was showing. She snorted again. "Is that a muggle?" he asked. "Irish," she said, a smile still hovering on her lips, as she dropped an extra pinch of powdered moonstone into her cauldron. The potion turned a bright shade of turquoise blue. "That looks even better than Sluggy's demonstration one," said James, with a low whistle. "Very impressive, Evans." "Thanks," Lily said. "Don't be revolting, Potter," spat out Snape, who looked more appalled the longer their conversation continued. "What?" said James, looking at Snape in confusion. "Catcalling is disgusting, and you know it." Snape's voice had gotten louder. "Mr. Potter, what on earth are you doing?" Slughorn's agitated voice loomed behind James. "Nothing, James said, scowling at Snape. 50 points from Gryffindor, and don't let me catch you," said Slughorn, inhaling deeply and attempting to button up the remainder of his avocado green satin waistcoat. "I swear I didn't." James was looking at Lily with a worried frown. "Professor, James didn't mean," said Lily, whose cheeks had turned bright red and who was now glaring daggers at her partner. "Prof, Snape was being an arswipe because he's jealous that Evans is talking to other boys without his approval, sir," Sirius drawled. He was lounging almost entirely across their desk by now. "Fuck off, Black!" Snape's right hand shook. "What? Going to try offing me in front of witnesses this time, Snivellus?" "I didn't think you had it in you, to be honest," Sirius said, closing his eyes momentarily and yawning loudly. Half the class laughed. His best friend had an incredible talent for infuriating his enemies. James wondered, not for the first time, would it end up getting him killed one day. Snape's wand hissed with a violet light. "Stop it, Sev," said Lily Evans. She had looked horrified at Sirius's statement, and James wondered was it because she realized he might be telling the truth. "Yes, stop being a controlling bastard, Sev," said Sirius with a loud sigh. "It's not a good look." Snape looked murderous. Peter, who was partnered with Remus at the desk in front of them, snorted so loud he practically choked. "Lovely work, Miss Evans," said Slughorn, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He too seemed to guess that this could all turn into a shit show at any minute. "Thank you," said Lily, whose cheeks were still flushed pink. "I added a pinch of powdered moonstone at the very end. I think it improves the result." She looked like she was trying to calm the situation down, and he was grateful. Despite him wanting to beat Snape into a pulp, the last thing Sirius needed was more hassle. My, I say, how very astute," said Slughorn, peering at her cauldron. "Excellent observation, Miss Evans. 50 points to Gryffindor." James beamed at her. Snape hissed something unintelligible under his breath. "Please turn around, Potter, be a good chap, and no more talking for the rest of the lesson. Or there will be detention for the entire class. Understood?" Slughorn huffed. James rolled his eyes and gave Snape a nasty stare. "Fine, as long as Evans keeps an eye on Snivellus here. Make sure he doesn't hex either of us with more dark magic, yeah?" He continues to look at Snape as though he wanted to punch him in the face. "I'm running out of my blood-replenishing potion as it is." He wasn't joking. Snape's lip curled dangerously. He watched Lily frown at her friend, a worried, confused look, before nodding at James. "Promise," she said. "He wouldn't do that anyway." "Wouldn't he just?" he said, his voice hard. Lily Evans' eyes narrowed. "Oh, fine," he said. He was pretending he didn't feel uncomfortable, a tiny bit scared in fact, at the idea of sitting with his back to Snivelus a few feet away from him, and in a foul mood. When he did turn back, reluctantly, Sirius looked half asleep, conked out with his arm out on the desk and his forehead on it. "Hey, you git," he said, lightly elbowing Sirius. "All right, Padfoot?" His stomach had been in a knot for the past 2 weeks, worrying about Sirius. "No," muttered his friend. "Fuck," James whispered, looking at him and sucking his lower lip. "Why can't you sleep?" "No idea." "But you're practically sleepwalking," James said, rubbing his forehead fretfully. "It doesn't make sense." Sirius sighed. "Sorry," he said quietly. "Merlin, don't be sorry. I'm just worried, that's all." Sirius nodded and said nothing. "Try to grab a nap now, Pads. I'll finish your potion," James said. "If you don't feel better by tomorrow, I'm going to have to tell Minnie, and I don't care how pissed you get about it." Sirius didn't reply. He looked like he was nearly asleep. "Fucking bloody fucking," James said to himself, patting Sirius's arm. It was very annoying how sweet Potter could be. Lily had listened to their whole interaction, because for some reason, she always seemed to be keeping an eye on what Potter was up to. She noticed when he was chatting with his best friends, he had a completely different tone of voice. Gone was the cocky arrogance, replaced by good-natured ribbing, genuinely funny, and a surprisingly caring, almost, Lily smiled to herself as she thought it, motherly attitude towards the other marauders. What a silly name, she thought as she doodled a pair of glasses in the margin of her potions book. He was still very annoying, though, which was a pity, as otherwise he was quite a good-looking sort of fellow, she thought, staring absent-mindedly at his muscular back and soft-looking, messy hair. She sighed. "Don't worry, I completely agree. Black and Potter are despicable, and the sooner they get expelled from Hogwarts, the better." "Huh?" Lily, who hadn't been paying attention, turned towards Severus with a faraway look in her eyes, a faint pink on her cheeks. Severus gave her a suspicious look. "You're not even listening to me," he objected, glaring in Potter's direction. "If you're talking about Potter again, I don't want to hear it," Lily replied. "And another thing," Severus said. "Why did you tell the fat slug about the extra moonstone?" Lily could feel her temper rising. "Don't be so rude, Sev," she hissed. "And why shouldn't I share that information with everyone else? Slughorn could add it to the instructions at—" "Why would we want anyone else knowing?" Severus looked at her blankly. "Why wouldn't we?" she countered. "Because it's our work. Our talent," he said, stepping closer to her. "I don't want you sharing that." "Yes, stop being a controlling bastard, Sev," she remembers Sirius saying. "That's selfish, Sev," she said, giving him a hard look. "Or are you planning on publishing a great update to the classic textbook and becoming famous?" Severus looked unsure. "Well, what other reason is there? You're not thinking of just keeping all our improvements to yourself and not telling anyone else, are you?" She knew by the look on his face that was exactly what he wanted to do. "What a waste," she said. Severus had always had a huge need to prove himself, to prove he was better than others. She knew it was linked to his low self-esteem, to his sad childhood. But this was selfish. To keep this information from others so he would shine? Or was it so that she would look up to him for helping her get better marks? Admire him? "I'm telling whoever I like, Sev, and don't tell me what I can and can't do," she said in a firm voice. He watched as her friend inhaled sharply but did not reply. She rolled her eyes and turned away, looking at Potter, who was carefully placing some last-minute additions to his friend's cauldron. He muttered a spell quietly, and Sirius Black's jumper transformed into a cozy blanket, which Potter tucked around his back. She smiled to herself. "Why do you keep staring at Potter?" Severus's voice was seething. He was doing that thing that really annoyed her, where he pronounced every last syllable of every word very carefully, as though he was a nasty professor talking to a class of idiots. And it made him sound so pedantic and so painful. Lily felt herself blush furiously. "I am not," she said, elbowing him sharply. "Ouch," said Severus, rubbing his arm. She had wonderfully pointy elbows. "Well, stop being a git then," she said, sticking her chin in the air. Severus made a frustrated sound.
Did you do anything to him? To Black? Lily whispered to him.
He attacked me, said Severus angrily, raising his voice.
I'm quite sure you retaliated if that's the case, Lily said, pursing her lips shut. She looked very like McGonagall just then. McGonagall in a foul mood. I defended myself. Ask the fat slug, Severus said, pounding the ingredients in his mortar with vigor. She elbowed him again. What was that for? Severus squealed. He isn't a nice person. He isn't kind. He fat-shames Slughorn and looks down on less intelligent students. He's friends with Mulciber and Avery and those awful people who love the dark arts. She hated having such negative thoughts about her friend. But how much longer could she avoid confronting the truth? For not being nice, she said, looking at him with a serious expression. Oh, he said, looking relieved, as though it was of little importance. Her heart sank further. Evans, could I have a word? Potter said. Please? She stuck a stray tendril of red waves behind her ear and nodded, heaving her heavy messenger bag over her shoulder. Lily, I don't, said Severus, moving so close that his arm was touching her. I'll see you later. I'm going to meet Mary and the others for lunch now, she said, stepping away from him. Severus's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Fine, he said tersely. Don't be late. Lily rolled her eyes dramatically. Don't tell me what, she said. The door slammed shut. Sirius's eyes flew open momentarily. Fucking bastard, murmured James, glaring after him. If he wakes Sirius, I swear to Merlin, I'll bloody well kill him. Lily looked at his friend. His eyes had closed again. The skin under his eyes looked almost purple. Is he okay? She asked kindly. I don't think so, said Potter, running his hand through his hair in agitation. He had a run-in with Snape a few weeks ago, and I think he might have been cursed. Would you mind trying to see if Snape would consider lifting whatever shitty spell Padfoot's under? I'm worried about him, and he won't let me bring him to see Poppy. Lily nodded, awkwardly shifting her weight from one foot to another. I don't think he would, she said, hating how she didn't believe what she was saying. She was so used to standing up for Sev to her friends. Potter's jaw clenched. Yeah, well, not everyone is as nice as you are, Evans, he replied. Did you see him hurt Sirius? She asked. No, but he couldn't walk when I got there, and I gave him almost an entire bottle of blood-replenishing potion, and he still looks like a ghost. She stared at Sirius again. He looked thinner than usual, his careless elegance more disheveled. She felt sorry for him, not a feeling she usually associated with these two boys. And you're not having me on? She said, almost hoping he was. No, you have my word. Why did she find herself utterly reassured by this? I'll do my best, Potter, she said. She sounded a bit fierce, and she meant it. Thanks, Evans. I'd be eternally grateful if you did, Potter replied, sending her a warm smile before looking back at his friend who was still out cold. He'll be all right. Don't worry, she said, touching his shoulder reassuringly. Potter's smile had gone from cute to cocky. He opened his mouth. Goodbye, Potter, she said, walking out of the classroom briskly. He was handsome and cute sometimes, but he was still very annoying. I'm bringing Black to Poppy tomorrow, so if you did curse him, I suggest you reverse the spell before then, Sev. What the hell does Black have to do with you? He was furious with her. Was she attracted to him? He remembered worrying about that a year ago, but he had convinced himself he was wrong. He had started to worry this year that she might secretly fancy Potter, his nemesis. But not Black. Black was nearly as bad. He was very good-looking, popular, a Quidditch player, clever, rich, a pureblood. He felt sick just thinking of everything that boy had which he wanted. You can't like him. He hates me, he added. And you always said he wasn't your type. You can't just change your mind about him like that. Lily's incredulous stare made him squirm. I have no idea what you're on about, Sev, but you're sounding like a massive flute, a spanner and a thick plank rolled into one. Excuse me? He said,
completely confused. If he's under a spell, you better reverse it before tomorrow. That's all I'm saying. So what if I curse him? Maybe he deserved it. You've no right to be getting involved. This is between me and Black. Stay out of it, Lily, please, Severus said, looking hurt. He's manipulating you, trying to make you feel sorry for him. Considering I haven't even told him about Poppy, I'd say you have no idea what you're talking about. Lily folded her arms angrily. Who was it then? Potter, was it? Ugh! That absolute bastard! Severus's blood was boiling. This is just to make me look bad. They want to trick you into not being friends with me. They're trying to play mind games. Potter pretends to be nice, but when it's just me and him, he's vicious, nasty. Don't let him use you, Lily. He's a pretentious, lying bastard. Well, if you didn't curse Black, I don't see what the problem is. And if you did, I don't care what your excuse is or what he did to you. Get rid of it. But you're not stooping to Potter's level, are you? The ambivalence was clear in his face. Good. Just because he's vicious and nasty doesn't mean you have to be. Severus stood silently, opening and closing the button of his shirt sleeve. It was all spiraling out of his control. Lily had gotten far too friendly with her Gryffindor roommates this year. She was now spending more of her free time with them than him. It was uncalled for. It was ridiculous. He was her best friend. He had introduced her to magic in the first place. She owed him. Surely she wanted to spend time with him as much as he did? He had managed to keep his Slytherin friends and Lily separate. Most recently, he had come up with an ingenious excuse for hanging around her. He had told his friends that she was helping him develop dark magic potions, that he needed her help to concoct the much-desired vials he made on demand for the older Death Eater recruits. It was lucrative. He needed the money so badly. The amount he got from home was shamefully, disgustingly inadequate. His expertise and success had earned him approval, and even more, an important meeting with his old friend, Lucius Malfoy. Evan Rosier, Hugo Avery, Gordon Wilkes, they were all members of the Sacred 28. Yet he, a mere half-blood, had been chosen along with them to meet the blonde-haired man to discuss the honor of joining Voldemort's recruits. 2 years as a trainee, and on finishing school, he would become a fully fledged member. Perhaps, if he showed enough aptitude, if he impressed the Dark Lord, the chance of joining his inner circle, his chosen few. He was protecting Lily this way, by letting them know she was interested in the dark arts. It was a long shot, but perhaps, if she was good enough, they might make an exception and let her join. His friends had laughed, made awful, crude comments about Severus's mudblood, which made him feel sick, but had left her alone. He was the only one who could help her. He was the only one who could keep her safe. He was going to save her. But now it was all going wrong. They had started arguing more and more about the company he kept, about his love of the dark arts. She kept bringing up arguments she and her friends had made about his views. "What about Mary?" she said to him, green eyes on fire. "She's a mudblood. Do you think she shouldn't be here? Do you think she shouldn't be a witch?" He hated Mary with a vengeance. He had heard Lily refer to her as her best friend and had practically gagged. "My best girlfriend," she had amended, not wanting to hurt his feelings. The little bitch had supplanted him, with her stupid pretty curls and annoying brainless giggling and her occasional raucous laughter that gave him a migraine. He hated her. He had tried to keep his friends away from Lily's friends, citing concern that she might refuse to cooperate with him if her friends were hurt. But when Mulciber asked for his help, this time he nodded. "Mary, Lily was looking for you a minute ago," he said, keeping his voice low, his hair falling over the right side of his face. "Oh, right," said Mary, who clearly didn't like him but kept the peace. "Did she say what she wanted?" "She said to meet her in the dungeons. She needs a hand with a potion she's finishing." Mary made a disbelieving face. "Why me?" she said. "Despite your general ineptitude in the subject, we had a bit of a row and she didn't want my help," he said. He hated how easily she believed that Lily didn't want him. He scowled, watching her descend towards the dungeons, 2 steps at a time, humming a tuneless Muggle song. A few minutes later, her high-pitched screams echoed through the corridors.
Hiding the tears in my eyes, 'cause boys don't